Good afternoon, people of grace. I want to take this Thursday Pastoral Connect to talk about a Bible character named Asaph. Asaph was the director of music in Israel. He served under David, and he actually wrote several of our Psalms. And what you see with Asaph is a strong passion for justice and a high level of frustration when he sees injustices that can't seem to get uprooted and corrected, and ultimately working through that and a trusting in God. You see this in several of his Psalms. He wrote Psalm 73, and in that Psalm, he got so frustrated with the wickedness and prosperity of those who were wicked, while the poor and the righteous groaned, that he almost gave up on the faith, and he almost exploded and went on a tirade on social media and would have been a great stumbling block to other people of the faith. But he didn't do that. He caught himself, he processed through it, and he came to a place of worship and really trying to look at things from an eternal perspective. That's Psalm 73. But he also wrote Psalm 82. And in Psalm 73, Asaph is an individual seeing wickedness and injustice and struggling. In Psalm 82, Asaph has this vision of not really seeing it from down here on earth, but getting caught up into heaven's perspective. And here's what Psalm 82 says. I don't normally read a whole psalm for a Pastoral Connect, but I do want to read this one. It says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Selah. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die, and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. Now, Psalm 82, verse 1, and the last verse, verse 8, that's Asaph speaking. He says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. And then in verse 8, Asaph speaks again and says, Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit the nations. But verses 2 through 7 are Asaph really kind of capturing God's thoughts as God discusses things with this divine council, this divine government. And what we would now know as our principalities and powers, or Jude and Peter call them celestial beings. They are angels, for a lack of a better term, and they're gods in the sense that they're spirit beings. They're not the creator, they're not Yahweh, but they're spirit beings like Yahweh is a spirit being. And God has this counsel. You see this kind of thing in Job chapter 1. You see it referenced in Revelation 12 that Satan goes in there and accuses us day and night in the counsel of God. And so now God speaks in this council of these celestial beings, and he says, how long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? And what God starts off with there is frustration and anger. So if you're angry about the injustice that you've seen, that's okay. God is angry, and God gets frustrated by it. Anger is the appropriate response to injustice. The challenge for us is that we don't handle anger well, and that's partly because of our own woundedness and brokenness. We want to heal things, we want to restore justice, but we're wounded healers. And I want to come back to that wounded healer idea in just a minute. But what you see in verses 2 through 7 is God communicating frustration because these high-level celestial beings, these principalities and powers, and Daniel's going to allude to them, these angelic beings that are over the different ethnic and political and people groups of this world, they're wicked. As verse 5 says, they're in darkness. And therefore, they don't do certain things. They don't, they show partiality to the wicked. They don't give justice to the weak and the fatherless. They don't focus on the afflicted, the destitute, the needy. Um, Rather, they focus on the top levels of society and the privileged. Um, and God's rebuking that. And that's the challenge for us is if we're going to err in our judgments at all, our human societies should be erring on the side of the weak. And the weak is like the low dangling fruit, meaning if something comes along that's troubling, that gets snatched first. So our most vulnerable people, and they're characterized by they're fatherless, afflicted, destitute, needy. Our justice system far too often punishes people that would fall into that kind of category more severely than it punishes the privileged who might do the same action. I'm not blaming any individual for that. I'm not saying that's easy to fix. I'm saying if we're going to be honest, it's there. It's real, and we need to be bothered by that and even angered by that. But we also need to maintain the perspective of Christians that the problem doesn't start in human society. It's there, and we need to address it. But the problem starts in this unseen heavenly realm that we can't really do anything about except practice justice and love mercy and walk humbly as we interact with all people. So that as we make judgments as humans, we should make sure that if we're going to err, and we're all going to err, that we err on the side of the most vulnerable and judge that way. And God is rebuking these angelic beings who are in darkness because they don't do that. And he says in verse 5, do you know why you don't do that? Because you have no knowledge or understanding. God says that to the angels. Well, they have lots of knowledge compared to us, but that's not really what God's talking about. What he's saying is, you don't know your people. You have no empathy for them. You have no intimacy with them. You have no relationship with them. You have no understanding of them. Since you have no relationship with them, no intimacy with them, no empathy for them, you will never understand them. So how can you ever make a just judgment without that empathy? And that's where God is different than these principalities and powers, because God shows that empathy counts. And when God shows it by becoming human. In the person of his Son, he becomes human, and he shows his compassion and his empathy, and he ultimately gets murdered by the authorities. So that's telling, especially in recent days, of how God tries to correct this problem and how he will ultimately correct this problem. And it starts from empathy and knowing other people's experience and seeking to understand them. And as Asaph, so to speak, creates this divine council dialogue like he's listening in on it, he notes that ultimately these evil principalities and powers will be overthrown. In the meantime, we're on the human side of this, and these things bleed out from the spiritual realm, the unseen realm, into our seen realm. And here's where they most bleed out. Jesus quotes this psalm, and he points out that human judges, human authority figures, are getting pulled up into this warfare of the gods and are actually exercising divine authority. Jesus says this in John 10, his whole Good Shepherd passage. And he is called out by the people who heard him, the religious leaders and authorities that heard him, because he's claiming equality with God. And Jesus responds and say, well, human judges in Psalm 82 are called gods. So how much more is the Son of God divine? And so what you find in Scripture is when humans are entrusted with authority, and a post I made in Facebook alludes to this, and you're going to get that post with the email with this message, because a lot of you don't have Facebook, maybe didn't see it, is that authority is ultimately a divine and sacred trust. It originates in the heavenly realm, and where you find humans entrusted with it, they're getting drawn up into this, what amounts to warfare of the gods, spiritual warfare. And so where you have leadership, where you have influence, where you have authority, and we all have a voice, we all have some influence and some authority, we want to make sure that we push back against the principalities and powers and make our judgments in favor of the weak and the fatherless and the afflicted and the destitute and the needy, and not just allow justice to favor those who are already the most prosperous. So I really want to challenge you with that, but also remember realistic expectations. This problem doesn't start in the human realm, and it won't be corrected in the human realm. So that's wounding and that's hurtful, and therefore all of us who are trying to heal it, as I believe that people of grace want to be instruments of healing, are wounded healers. And Henry Nouwen has a great book called The Wounded Healer. And what he challenges us with is, at the end of modernism, in the nuclear man, we need to recognize how broken that is, and that it has caused us to split in our woundedness as we attempt to heal into two camps: the mystic, who withdraws from the world and just tries to process it internally, and the revolutionary. And what Nouwen points out is the revolutionary, without that mystic processing and that arriving at peace, will never create a successful revolution in God's eyes, because he'll just do it the way the world does it. But the mystic, if they don't engage the society, they're not really fulfilling their calling either. So Nouwen points out very well that you have to have both, and you have to work through these things internally and come to a place of peace and acceptance and patience and long suffering, knowing that we're not going to ultimately correct all this in this age, but we can still work on it. But we have to start from a place of peace. And that's what Jesus did. So Jesus is the one who launched a revolution that really changed the world. But he did it from a place of acceptance, even as he was mowed down by the injustice of the established order. He didn't try to blow it up. And we need to make sure that we follow our King and not run ahead of him. Let's make sure that we're like Asaph, that we get angry, but that ultimately we process it well and are truly people of peace. And that starts in here. And then from that place, we try to work it out to here, knowing that ultimately it's spiritual warfare. So don't lose the battle for your spirit. Win that first. And I hope that Psalm 82 gives you a little bit of more perspective into warfare amongst the gods, injustice, and God's own passion and frustration related to that. How all that gets brought together in Christ. He is our King. He is the Prince of Peace. Let's make sure that we are followers of him, not running ahead of him. Thank you for your time.